January 6th. We look forward to seeing you then. Also, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make during the meeting, please go ahead and put them into the chat or message me directly, and we will make sure that we can do our best to get those answered. If there's nothing else right now, we will go ahead and let our Board of Education report begin from Mr. Will Tenby.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully by January 6th, we'll know who the President of the United States is. That seems to be in question right now. So I've got a very brief report, and as I'm looking at the agenda, it's chock full. So why don't I just try to proceed here? Anne, I'm going to try this, see if I can get the presentation up. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
The system works. That's great. So we've only had one meeting in between parent sounding board meetings, and that meeting was held on October 15th. As we do before many meetings, we had something called Spotlight, which goes from about 5 to 5:30. The board meetings start at 6. And we had a brief profile of what's going on at Edith Wolford Elementary School and Timberview Middle School from the principals of those respective schools. And they always do a great job kind of profiling the school and highlighting the great things that are going on. On a fairly frequent basis, the board does get involved in a adopt a road program. And so on October 10th, we had a cleanup of the same area that we always do, which is Milam Road between Old Ranch and Shoup. So that was a little outdoor activity, and it was a beautiful day, and it keeps that corridor clean. Most importantly, I mentioned at the last parent sounding board meeting that we were endeavoring to have a student linkage to discuss diversity, equality, and inclusion in D20. Some of that proactive and some of that based off some feedback that we've gotten that kind of complemented the feedback that we got that maybe our faculty needs to be more representative of our minority populations in the district. And so we've started that process. It started on, I believe, Monday at the Classical Academy. I had to come to the Pacific Northwest kind of unexpectedly for family issues, but Karen Reynolds substituted for me, and she and Tom LaValle conducted the first student linkage. And as you can see from this slide, that we've got teams going to each high school in the district, meeting with students and discussing the issue of diversity, equality, and inclusion. That feedback will be rolled into the entire district's lens on this issue, and maybe Tom can expand on that as he gets to his comments. In terms of formal things that we accomplished in meetings, we went through the approval of the school accreditation status for District 20, which again is exemplary. And again, I may defer to Tom to talk about those results and how proud we are of the performance of virtually every school in the district. We go through a monthly financial report. And that was through September, and Becky Allen shared that with us. And as mentioned before, she does an exceptional job of sharing financial information and helping us to really understand it, because it is dense data, particularly in a year like we're having now with budget rescissions and other issues related to the pandemic. So. A minor issue, more of a academic issue, is we approved a permanent easement for a retaining pond at the Wolf Ranch area, which obviously includes the Center for Modern Learning, Legacy Peak Elementary School, and the Challenger Learning Center are all on that campus right now. And so we kind of moved around the location of a retaining pond and agreed to an easement for that, which was at no cost to the district. Tom gave an update. I'm sorry, Jim Smith, Dr. Jim Smith gave an update with the facilitators. Kimberly Sherwood in particular gave an update on the strategic planning process, which is resuming after a short hiatus that was caused, again, by the pandemic. There was a lot of momentum happening as we were in February, leading to some milestones that would have concluded last year. That was put on hiatus, but it is resuming. Henry Reitwiesner gave a building fund update, which we see virtually every board meeting, and that goes through all of the bond projects, the facility audit projects, and other capital work in the district. And we are transitioning. Many of you may or may not know that there is a sixth member of the board who is a liaison from the United States Air Force Academy. And for the past 5 years, Colonel Troy Harding has been an exceptional person on the board. He's a non-voting member, but he has a very, he's had a tremendous voice on the board in terms of reason, comments, and input. He is being succeeded by Colonel Andre Johnson, who runs the 10th Air Base Wing at the Academy, and he seems to be another exceptional representative of the United States Air Force Academy. And so that transition happened at that meeting. Colonel Johnson's official first meeting will be at our next meeting at the beginning of, I'm sorry, on this Thursday. So, and that is really it. The meeting was not that long. It was not the marathon 7-hour meeting that we had back in August to listen to a lot of community issues. And that's the business that was attended to. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there are no questions, but you do have one offline, my address is below. And Diane, that concludes the report.
Thank you, Will. Are there any questions for Will? Okay, if any come up, please do go ahead and add them to the chat. And Will, I just want to say thank you so much. You really do an absolutely amazing job of letting us know exactly what's going on at the Board of Education meetings and allowing us to be able to pass that information along to all of our schools. So thank you very much for the time and effort that you put into that.
Yeah, happy to do it. And thanks to everybody on this committee who put so much into the district. It's really appreciated.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Gregory, we are ready for the superintendent's remarks.
Thank you, Diane. It's nice to be with everybody again. I would much rather be in person, but it is nice to be with everybody again in whatever way we can make that happen. I'm going to sound like a broken record probably, but again, I want to thank everybody, not just Parent Sounding Board members, but our entire community for their patience, grace, flexibility, support. Everything that I've received from our community, really, probably the best word is understanding for the different things that are disruptions and non-traditional things that are happening across the school district. So thank you all. And then I guess timely, before I go on, Will, don't forget that your screen is shared. I don't know if you're going to log off or not, but don't leave us with your screen locked. Nobody else will be able to present. Just to follow up on, thank you. The election results from yesterday, it's not in no way am I trying to make it political, but I think at some point in the future, we may want to have the appropriate person talk about how some of the ballot issues that appear to have passed yesterday will either impact either directly or indirectly the school district. And I just quickly, without going through a list, the three that come to mind are the repeal or semi-repeal of the Gallagher Amendment, the family leave provision, and the reduction of income tax. maybe something that we want to talk about as we move forward, just to understand, so that you folks can understand what the potential impact, positive or negative, or neither, what that impact may be on the school district going forward. So with that, I think as Will said, there's a long agenda, and I'll reserve time at the end to answer any questions. And I know I don't know, but I'm pretty sure there will be pretty significant interest in what Ms. Allen presents towards the end of the agenda. So with that, Diane, I will pass it along.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. And next we are going to discuss digital resources in the K through 12 classroom philosophy. We will be joined by Lori Hartman, the Director of Digital Integration Services, and Shelley Kuser, our Chief Information Officer.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think I can grab the screen here. All right, can everybody see my screen okay there?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for this opportunity to come to you today to talk about the superintendent's initiative around digital resources in the K-12 classroom, a philosophy that we started putting together last year. So this initiative from the superintendent actually started last year, and we did continue it to finish it out this year because we were kind of left hanging with COVID. And one thing we wanted to do is make sure that all of our stakeholder groups had the opportunity to see the philosophy before it actually gets published. The charge was to develop a philosophy on the use of technology to support teaching and learning in elementary, middle, and high school classrooms. So I want to give you kind of a rundown as to our timeline and all the activities that we did to reach our philosophy, or it's a draft one. So last August, we did first a selection of committee members, and that consisted of several different people from different stakeholder groups, people from the principals from all three levels. We had some parents participate, key people at schools, as well as directors and staff specialists from the district level. We also had a facilitator and a note taker, and they just kind of guided us through the process. They were not decision makers in the philosophy in any way. The next thing we did is in September of last year, we had our first committee meeting and established our charge and started beginning our work. We wanted to make sure that we started with a foundation of the Academy District 20 mission and belief statement. The philosophy should be supporting these, and so we first read through this to make sure it guided our work. This is also located, I'm sure you've all seen it, on the district website. We then identified 4 areas for our focus on what we wanted the philosophy to accomplish. One is that it was supporting the essential skills for our students. Second, that it supported powerful learning in the classroom for learners. Also, equitable access for staff members and students to digital devices. And we addressed digital health and safety issues. We continued in October of last year, which you might have remembered if you were on this committee last year, is we held a stakeholder survey, and then we began our work, our research. I want to just briefly go over a few of the questions we had and how many people responded. This is the list of stakeholder groups that we did send the survey to. You can see here how many people from each of those stakeholder groups responded, for a total of 70 responses that we used to consider in developing this philosophy. The highest being from the K-12 principal group, and then the parent sounding board. So thank you for your input if you were one of those last year. One of the questions we asked was, at what grade level would access to technology and digital resources be appropriate? Now, the participants could select all that apply, so that they could select more than one or all of them if they thought it was appropriate. So at the kindergarten through 2nd grade, we received 48 responses. 3rd through 5th, 64 of those 70 said that it was appropriate. Middle school had 66 responses, and high school had 64 responses. So you can see from grade 3 through 12 had the most responses, but still a significant number thought that kindergarten through 2nd grade could benefit from technology in the classroom. Another question we asked was, when do you think technology should be used in the classroom? Again, check all that apply. So the good news here on this is nobody responded to technology should not be used in the classroom. We had, when it was appropriate for the grade level, received 44 responses. When it provided access to current materials and information, had 56 responses. When it supports the learning objective, had 67. You can see that was one of the, had the most responses to it. And then we had 8 other people respond to different things or put something in. So they commented on innovation, creation, and communication would be important. Only on a tablet or laptop, and I think this is addressing that some students are doing this work on their cell phones. Technology should always be considered a resource. Incorporate to support learning objectives and not replace teacher as an educator, which we totally agree. It should be used for blended learning. This is when students are in the classroom and also are using resources online. And assessing information as well as tutorials, additional practice, and collaboration. And for grade appropriate assessments. One of the other questions was, which of the factors is most important to consider when using technology in the classroom? So they had 9 items to choose from, and they had to rank them in order that they thought was the most important. And these results that I will share is a combination of all of those responses. So the one that floated to the top was online safety and protection of data was one of the most important that this group felt. The second was innovation, creativity, and critical thinking. Third was the teacher's ability to use the technology, and this addresses the professional learning, how important that is for teachers in how to use these devices and resources with students. Number 4 was equity of access to devices. 5 was the infrastructure, to make sure that when they're in school that they have adequate bandwidth and access to internet and resources that we're asking students to use. Number 6 was digital citizenship skills for students. 7 was equity of access to online resources. 8 was screen time, and 9 was age of device. We try to only keep our devices on our network for 5 years or less, so that creates a better user experience. We then continue from November through February, our committee work and research, and we looked at several different models out there of technology integration into the classroom. And we always asked ourselves, after each time we did some research, what key ideas should be used in the philosophy statement? So some of the models we looked at is one called SAMR, which is a way to look at technology and integrating into the classroom, is substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. We looked at the 4 shifts protocol, and those items are listed there as to what that addresses. We did have some professional learning around this a few years ago with some of our groups. The ISTE standards, ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education. They have standards for students, teachers, administrators, and technology coaches. But the ones for students are listed here, what they think that students should be able to do. We looked at principles for effective digital learning. We explored the technology integration matrix. This is a framework for use of technology to enhance learning, where teachers can assess where they currently are. We looked at the digital citizenship skills from Common Sense Media that we felt were important. And we did some research on screen time. So after all of that research, we in March came back together. We had, of course, drafted our philosophy. We finalized it in March. And here's what the statement reads. Digital resources should be used to enrich learning, promote student achievement, and advance students towards deep, authentic learning in a healthy, balanced, and safe digital environment that is representative of the ever-changing, digitized modern world. And since we wrote this in early March, we were not aware of how ever-changing this would be in education. On this slide here is the actual statement, and I'm going to have Mrs. Kuzer put that in the chat if you want to click on it so you can see the entire document, because you probably can't read it on my screen here. This is the philosophy statement at the top, and there are 3 belief statements listed that address all of those items, and then the research and the things that we felt were important that goes along with this statement. So you get a chance to read that as well. To continue, so we came up with that in March, and then of course we had the COVID pause. The superintendent did charge us with finishing this initiative, which brings us to today in early November here, where we are presenting this philosophy to all the stakeholder groups. And our next step would be adopting this and publishing the philosophy statement out to the community. So that's where we ended up, and we're hoping that you get a chance to read through that document. Thanks for allowing us to give you this presentation. And are there any questions or comments that you would have for Shelley or I? All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Lori. That was a great presentation, and we look forward to reading the information and learning more about this. I am curious to see how things are going to progress with all the digital time online that children are spending right now. So should be very interesting, but thank you so much for all of your hard work. We greatly appreciate it.
Welcome. Thank you.
If I could just add, Diane, just to make sure everybody's clear on this, because the timing is maybe in question, but that initiative was for last year, and Shelley, Lori, and the team started on this, if you remember, in the fall of 2019. It's not a result of COVID. It just happens to be that they got 75% through the process when this COVID thing hit, and it forced us to think differently about how we deliver instruction. But it really is not related to COVID. This was well underway prior to the current environment.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And now we will turn to Tacey Killingsworth. She is going to present on Project Alert survey results.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen with you. All right. So I am going to be sharing the Project Alert survey results from the survey we issued last spring, and just a little bit of background around the Project Alert survey. So District 20 has been surveying students regarding their perceptions, beliefs, and use of drug and alcohol substances since 1990. We used to use the American Drug and Alcohol Survey. And then in 2011-12, the district adopted Project Alert, which includes a curriculum and a survey. And so we survey students in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. And we've been doing the Project Alert survey now since 2012. So this shows you here the 10 specific substances that have been addressed over the years, cigarettes, alcohol, etc. And then this past spring, we knew that it would be important for us to gather some data around electronic vapor products, as well as prescription drugs. So I worked with Maureen Lang, who is Executive Director in Learning Services, and then Martha, who is our health specialist. And we developed additional questions for our survey to really gather some foundational data around these two things as well. So we'll see some of those results. And again, the project really is reflective of students self-reporting whether they've tried these substances, self-reporting about negative consequences they may have experienced in relation to these substances. And then we'll look specifically at their beliefs about the effects of alcohol, marijuana, and electronic vapor products. And it's pretty interesting data. So here shows our participation rates. So the goal really is to have at least 25% at each grade level in each school. And when we administered this last spring, it actually happened about the same time we shifted into remote learning. So we administer the survey in a supervised setting. And so you can see from here that our middle school folks were able to get more of the surveys administered prior to shifting to remote learning than our high school, but still a pretty good amount of students who participated in this survey. And so the big highlights, just you'll see trend data over time in this presentation, but the biggest highlights when we look at the responses from 2018 until 2020, we saw an increase in the use of alcohol, marijuana, and inhalants among our 6th and 8th grade students. On the flip side, we saw a decrease or stabilization in the use of these same substances for our 10th and 12th grade students. For 8th grade, we saw an increase in both the number reporting they've tried cigarettes, as well as the number reporting they have experienced negative effects of alcohol. And we saw a decrease in the number of our 10th and 12th graders reporting that they've experienced negative effects of alcohol. And then in regards to the electronic vapor products, and you'll see this clearly in the data, the use of those products increases as the students get older. So you're going to see the data in two forms today, this graph data, and then you'll see it in table format where we can see the specific percentages. So this graph represents 6th grade students who report having ever tried any of these substances here. And you can see that the green line there is the alcohol. So definitely more students have experimented with alcohol. And you can see from 2016 to 18 to 20, we're actually seeing an increase. And here's what that looks like in percentages. So in 2016, 18%, and then we moved to 21%, and then 24%. Most of the other substances are definitely lower percentages, and you can see the increase here for inhalants went from 3 to 6, right, and marijuana 1 to 2. And then for our 8th grade students, definitely students have reported trying inhalants more often than 6th graders, with alcohol still being our number 1. You can see a sharp increase here from 2018 to 2020 for students reporting having tried alcohol. And what that looks like in percentages, so in 2016 it was 36, and then it went down in 18 to 30%, and then a pretty sharp increase to 41% in 2020. You can also see the increase here where they've gone from 3 to 6% reporting having tried cigarettes, and then for marijuana 5 to 8, and inhalants 3 to 6. So we definitely saw an increased trend in our 8th grade students. For our 10th graders, it's clear that more students just in general try the substances, but you can see that even with alcohol, it's a downward or stabilized trend, if you will, and the other substances as well. And here's what that looks like in percentage. So definitely higher percentages, but going down, right? So that's our hope, obviously. And then when we look at our 12th graders, definitely higher percentages reporting that they've tried it, but again, that downward trend in alcohol, as well as the marijuana and inhalants and cigarettes going down. And that's what we see in our percentages as well. So the next part of the survey asks students, have they experienced consequences as a result of using alcohol? So have they felt sick? Have they been in a fight because of drinking? Do they get in trouble at school or at home? Or have they done something that they later felt sorry for? So pretty low numbers percentage-wise for our 6th graders, and in fact went down in some cases. But where we see the increase is with our 8th graders, which I highlighted earlier. So we went from 3% to 7% having experienced being sick from alcohol, and you can see the other areas also have gone up. A little bit smaller percentages, but have gone up. We look at our 10th graders and 12th graders, again, they pretty much stayed the same or went down a little bit. So definitely more stable when it comes to experiencing these effects of alcohol. And here's our 12th graders. And in fact, went from 25 to 21 in terms of feeling sick, but you can see that consistently across the board. The next thing we ask them is really their beliefs about the effects of alcohol and marijuana. And so when you look at the indicators, you can see that every other one is possible, what kids might consider as positive effects. So alcohol relaxes you, lets you have more fun, helps you get away from your problems. And then the other indicators are more of the negative effects, right? It causes you to do poorly in sports, it gets you in trouble in school, and it slows your reaction time. So as we move through these graphs, what you'll notice is our kids for sure understand that there are negative effects associated with these substances, and our younger students don't see the positive effects of alcohol and marijuana as much as our older students. You'll see these bars getting closer together, if you will, as we move through the grade levels. So this is 6th grade students reporting the effects of alcohol. And then here are 6th grade students, their beliefs about the effects of marijuana, so very similar. And when you look at 8th grade, you can see, and it was reflected in the data I just showed you, right? They do see maybe some positive impacts or effects of alcohol, and you can see that increase in that light bar from this spring survey. And it's very similar to marijuana, right? You can see it went from 31 to 40, etc. And then when you look at our 10th and 12th graders, those bars are getting closer, right? So they're starting to see that there might be some positive effects of these substances. 10th grade effects of marijuana. And then our 12th graders' beliefs about effects of alcohol. Again, those bars are closer together. And their beliefs about marijuana as well. So then here's the data that we gathered around electronic vapor products. So we simply asked, have you ever tried it? And so you can see that our 6th graders, 3% reported they had tried it, 11% for our 8th graders, 17 for 10th graders, and 32 for our 12th graders. And then we asked them, how often have you used those products in the past 30 days? And so for sure, our 6th and 8th graders, almost never, right? A little bit of experimentation here, but more in 1 to 2 days. However, when we look at our 10th and 12th graders, that increases. And in fact, you'll see that our 12th graders, 9%, reported that they've used an electronic vapor product almost every day for the last 30 days. We asked them about their beliefs around the effects of vapor products. And again, you'll see that our younger students think there's more negative effects. And our older students, there's less of them that think it's negative, which directly, makes sense because more of them use it. So they're going to say that's less negative effects. So we go from 88% in 6th grade. And then when we get to 12th grade, only 72% really think that it's harmful for them. And then the last area that we looked at were the prescription pain medication. And so we asked them, how often have you taken prescription pain medication differently than as prescribed by the doctor? So this is kind of interesting. There's not a ton of difference between our grade levels. So most often kids take it normal, right? But there's a few who said they've done it 1 to 2 times. And it's very similar when we look at our 10th and 12th graders. And then we asked our students, how easy is it to get prescription drugs? And you'll see that our younger students say it's more challenging. So 86% and 75%, and then as they get older, it's less challenging. Still not easy to get them, but less challenging to get prescription drugs. So the question becomes, what do we do with this data? Why is this important information? So I have already shared this information with the Board of Education, and I'm sharing it with all of our stakeholder groups as well. I shared school-specific data to our principals, so they're able to go in and really look at each grade level, each substance, and really pin it down to what's happening within their school community and what that means for supporting kids within their communities. I'll be presenting to the counselors tomorrow to talk about the data and help them think about next steps as well for supporting kids. We also have parent academies that we offer to support our families in understanding how they can support children in making better decisions. And then the other piece is, so part of the Colorado academic standards, this drug and alcohol prevention, if you will, falls under standard 4, which is prevention and risk management. So my department, curriculum instruction, will be working with schools and the teachers who are teaching this curriculum to talk about what are the resources, you know, how well is it working? What is the data in your school saying? We know that when we adopted Project Alert, there were no questions around electronic vapor products, right? And so how much education are we giving our kids on that? What types of resources might we need to better support our kids in making good decisions when it comes to saying no to drugs and alcohol? So that is the end of the report. What questions might you have?
We have had a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first one was how are students picked to respond to the survey?
Oh,
It was stated, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's a great question. So in the past, what they did is they asked principals to select groups within the school, knowing that we needed 25% minimum. This past spring, we said, why not open it up to all kids? So we asked principals to designate a time within their buildings where all kids would get the opportunity to take the survey, which of course was interrupted by moving to remote learning because it is conducted in a supervised environment.
But all kids, Tacey, still means even grades, not the odd.
Yes, all 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students.
We also had a question about whether the survey asks students about household use of those substances to assess for any correlation.
No, the current survey does not ask those specific questions about household. It's more about student use and beliefs about the substances. Great question.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Those were rather encouraging results. It's nice to see we're not having any real changes in what's happening at this point in time. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing how those results are implemented into the schools.
Absolutely, thank you.
Our next report will be from Dr. Jim Smith. He will be giving us an enrollment report.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Can you see the screen, the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, again, good afternoon, and I'm Jim Smith, Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services, and under my umbrella of responsibilities also rests Central Registry, so everything related to student registrations, enrollments. I get the opportunity to work with that, and it's actually very fascinating work in that we have over the years shown growth as a district year after year. This year is a little bit of an anomaly in lots of different ways, including with enrollment, so we'll look at that. This report, though, is what I typically give every year, just around the October time as we wrap up with our October count. Currently, we have folks working from Central Registry with our registrars in schools to audit the counts that we collected during the October count window. And that's a consistent thing that's done across the state for school districts to identify how many students we actually have in attendance in the school district. That's used then later in helping to establish our budget and as well as helping us understand staffing needs in schools, as well as any programmatic needs that we might have. Ms. Allen's going to follow this presentation, which is an excellent complement to this, with the impact budgetarily. And so I know that that will be exciting. So I'd like to start with just saying thank you to the Central Registry team. It's a relatively small team, but over the summer and until October 1st, they have registered 4,243 students. You can see the breakdown by elementary, middle, and high school. And they will continue to register students throughout the course of the year, obviously, but the bulk of it does happen in the spring, summer, and early fall. So you'll see with the October count, this is our unofficial October count. Once we finish with all the audits and ensure that all the students that we believe are here are accounted for, and if we have missed any students, we've also captured them. Once we have all of that resolved, then we will have our official October count number, but this will be very close to what the end result will be. As you can see, when compared to last year's data, in 2019, we are down approximately 900 students when compared to last year. So this is just the 5-year enrollment trend, just to show that we have year after year shown growth in the district. This is, again, an anomaly and a year that we are going to have to adjust. And again, I won't take any of Ms. Allen's information or stealing of her thunder that's coming up later. This is the 10-year enrollment trend, and it's just interesting to know that on average over the 10 years, we have grown about 370 students year after year. And so having this change is definitely something that we're not used to as a district, but something that we will be addressing moving forward. Part of the question here is, so where are these students? If we're down 900 students, where did they go? And while we can account for some of them, because we do collect homeschool intent letters, which is what families need to file if they're going to homeschool their child, but we still have a large number of students who aren't accounted for. And so we're trying to identify that as well and where they might be when looking to the future. So just kind of a quick summary here. As I said, we're down about 900 students. When we look at choice, we have about 22% of our choice is in district, 16% is out of district. That's a little bit lower than what we've seen in the past, but I think that's probably typical across the region, if not the state. But when you look at our data from 2011 to the present year, we still are up 2,062 students when you think about that. In terms of the highest year of growth, in 2016, 2017, we had 552 students, and this year would represent our lowest with a decrease of 907 students. So that's just kind of a quick wrap up of October count and just the kind of current state of where we are. And I think it sets the stage nicely for Ms. Allen, who's going to talk about the impact budgetarily. But if you have any questions, I'm open to responding to those.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Dr. Smith? All right, Ms. Allen, please take over. First, you're going to discuss the decreased enrollment and budget implications, and then we will also have a lovely presentation from you about COVID quarantine and the isolation process.
All right, well, good afternoon. It's nice to see all of you, and Dr. Smith, thank you for explaining everything of where we are with enrollment, and I'm just going to come in and just add one layer about what does that look like monetarily.
I'm sorry, Dr. Allen, we're not hearing you.
Thank you. I apologize. I said a lot of good stuff. No, I'm just kidding. So I will start again. My apologies. I was saying it's nice to see everyone, and I appreciate Dr. Smith's information on enrollment. And my piece here is just to kind of share what the implications are budget-wise for that. So as you know, two of the big variables around how much money a school district receives is the per pupil revenue amount. That's the amount of dollars that the state gives for one student at your school district. And currently that number is a little over $7,600. And then secondly, the number of students. So you take this dollar amount and then you multiply it by the number of students you have. So certainly as we have more students or less students, that directly impacts the amount of funding that we receive. So as Dr. Smith shared, we're down about 900 students from last year. Now in the adopted budget that we passed in June, we have to project the number of students that we think we will have this year. It's like a weather forecast. We don't know. We don't have the information. The snowstorm hasn't hit yet, but we think 2 to 4 inches. It's kind of that type of approach. So last year, working with a demographer and internally as well, examining the data, our best, most informed estimate was that our enrollment from last year to this year would increase by 120 students. And in fact, there has always been an enrollment increase from one year to the next in District 20. So for budget purposes, we can't just consider that we're down 900 students. We also have to consider that we, on top of that, projected an additional. So that's why I'm saying here in this second bullet, about 1,000 students below the projection that is listed in our adopted budget. So if we take 1,000 and multiply that times the per pupil revenue amount, we get about $7.6 million. That's about $7.6 million less than what we budgeted for in the adopted budget. And it's important to note that this is separate from the decrease that we had in our per pupil revenue last year. If you recall, across the state, per pupil revenue was cut by 5% due to the economic impacts of COVID. And that equated to about $9 million for District 20 that we had cut out of the budget. Now, because of the decrease in enrollment, we're facing an additional cut to the adopted budget. Now, there is something in play, state statute, that District 20 really hasn't needed to lean on in the past that will help us. So there are other school districts, of course, that do experience declines from year to year. And there is state statute that allows school districts or makes the provision for school districts to not just use this year's count of students if you're in a decline. You can look backwards and average the numbers. So when we average our student count this year with our average last year, certainly what that does, because we were much higher last year, it puts a cut. Imagine averaging, we're going to only be down, if you will, from a funding perspective, about 500 students. So that averaging component is nothing new. It's been in play. It just is something that District 20 has not had to rely upon. And so what we're really looking at is a decrease this year of about $3.8 to $4 million. We will know more when the October count numbers are certified. Now, what schools? At the start of each school year, we don't know the exact enrollment that will be at each school. We have our projections, the weather forecast, if you will, that we created and built from the prior year. And so what we do is take 90% of that number for each school, and schools are funded according to that dollar amount. And what happens, or that amount of students. And then what happens is, once we're done with the October count, we do what's called true up, where we look at the actual enrollment, and wherever that difference was between how schools were funded in July and what their actual enrollment turned out to be, then we give additional money to the school. So they're trued up with their October count enrollment. This year, I don't anticipate many schools being any higher than what they were funded at in July. But please know we do not go back to the schools and say, I'm sorry, you owe us money. We overpaid you in July. We do not do that. Schools have gone to great lengths to plan for the use of those dollars, and we don't want to go ahead now and say, I'm sorry, you have to give those back. So schools, if they've gone below that 90% upon which they were funded, they are held harmless. And certainly we will also be watching the enrollment fluctuations that occur in our kindergarten through 8th grade classrooms to see if we have significant movement of students in and out of Journey K-8 at the quarter marks. Then certainly we would work with a school principal if their enrollment significantly increased because they brought students back and they felt that they still, we will look at that scenario and see if we need to provide additional funding to support them. Any questions for me?
We do not have any currently in the chat, so I think we can go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I proceed to my next topic?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again here. So the purpose of the presentation that I am going to share with you now is, each one of you, each one of your students, each of our staff members within the district, either personally or watching others, is seeing this quarantine and isolation process as a result of the COVID pandemic. And the purpose here is for me to kind of just shed some light on the whole process for you so that you see what are the tools that were given to navigate this, what are some of the guidelines in place, and I'm hoping that once you see this, perhaps some of the experiences that you or your family may have had here over these last few months, like a quarantine or a quarantine that's issued and lifted the next day, of why those things happen and how it works. So first of all, what the purpose of this particular slide is just to let you know where the guidelines come from that we follow as we're navigating keeping our students and staff safe with respect to COVID and the guidelines that we're expected to follow. First of all, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment have prepared the guidelines, and El Paso County Public Health uses those and relies on those guidelines as well. And we have a lot of conversation with El Paso County Public Health. There is a lot of interplay on a daily basis. They are often reaching out to us with information about a particular staff member or student who may be positive or may have been exposed to a positive case, etc. And certainly if there's a question, then we can consult with them as well. And I just happen to put the links here. You can search on their websites if you'd like to see the exact documents in a more thorough form than what I'm going to share with you today. So how do we navigate this? Well, there's a complex set of guidelines that I'll show you in a moment, and it truly takes a team. So whenever we have an issue at a school where a student is symptomatic, or a staff member is symptomatic, or a student or staff member is positive, etc., we really don't have anybody out on an island making those decisions about next steps on their own. It truly takes a team. And we have what we call huddles. And they're virtual huddles in teams, just like what we're having right now for our meeting. We have a representative from HR because human resources needs to be involved. It's a very high likelihood that some staff member is impacted. Business services is my department, and either myself or Peter Ristig, he does an outstanding job, Director for Risk Management, is on a part of this process on the call as well. Our District 20 lead nurse, again, fantastic work. Someone or both, sometimes it's one person, two people from the communications department. You all, I am sure, have received communications regarding COVID, and again, it takes a team effort to ensure that our communications are transparent, they are clear and easy to read, and timely, of course. Obviously, the principal or any other school staff and the PSSG is involved as well, and that person is the principal supervisor. So this team meets and we process through the details of the situation and decide next steps. The other folks that we rely upon in this process is called our OCRT. They are a team that does deep cleaning and sanitization when we have a situation that requires that. We rely on transportation quite a bit because some of the students who may be setting off, if you will, a quarantine, rode the bus. And so we need to investigate who was on the bus, who might be determined as close contacts, and follow up accordingly. And then Sodexo, our food service partners. Sometimes a big quarantine will obviously impact the amount of meals that need to be prepared. Doug Valley, as an example, was closed one day for e-learning and over a period of time, and we created a new opportunity for parents to pick up remote meals. And so we really partner with all of these folks. Now, before I just provide some details about the guidelines, just a moment about vocabulary, because these two words, isolation and quarantine, sure do come up a lot in the process. Isolation refers to the person who is ill or who is positive for COVID. And I say or positive for COVID because that person may not be displaying any symptoms, but that person is considered to be in isolation and they're expected to stay home and away from others. Now, isolation, the period of time, scientists have determined that once someone is symptomatic for COVID, or if they're asymptomatic, we assume the day they had their COVID test, it takes 10 days for their infectious period to end. So that's why the isolation period is 10 days. Quarantine refers to people who are not ill. They were exposed, potentially exposed to the ill individual, the COVID positive individual. They're also staying at home, but the quarantine period is 14 days. Because if someone has exposure to someone who's COVID positive, it might take them 14 days to begin to display any type of symptoms. So that's why those lengths of time are different. Now, the information comes to us in different ways. Sometimes it presents itself as shown at the top part of this slide, where students or staff members are showing symptoms. And we have to evaluate and assess those symptoms, and you'll see why in a moment. So a big one is called a critical symptom. And again, this is coming from the Colorado Department of Health and El Paso County. Loss of taste or smell is identified as critical. It does not mean we have had folks who have loss of taste or smell and are negative for COVID. So it's not just a sure thing, but the predictability or the correlation is high enough that it's identified as a critical symptom. Major symptoms are fevers, coughs, shortness of breath, and then a series of minor symptoms over in this area that really could appear from a cold. They could appear from something that you ate last night didn't agree with you. There are a number of things there that are typical symptoms, and they're classified as minor. And again, you'll see where that comes up in just a moment. And then, of course, we may have someone who's COVID positive, and they may be symptomatic or asymptomatic. So this flow chart, when I first saw it, it looks a little scary, but you get used to the tool. And I'm not going to go through each piece of this. I just kind of want to give you an overview of the process so you have just some insight into how this all works. So what happens if we have a person who's ill or who is positive for COVID? We start in this part of the flow chart. We refer to it as the red box area of the flow chart. And if you'll notice, there's three pieces here. Does the student test positive for COVID or the staff member? Does the person have new symptoms and they've been exposed to someone who's positive for COVID? Or has someone lost their taste or smell? If any of those things are in play with this person, They are isolated at home for 10 days, and their close contacts are immediately quarantined. And the quarantine period has to last the full amount of the 14 days. We cannot, that's never going to be one that lifts early. When you've been around someone with COVID, you've been around someone with symptoms who's been around someone with COVID, or that you've been around someone who's lost their taste or smell. So now let's say that we don't have someone who meets this criteria, but we've got someone, let's just say stuffy nose, sore throat, fever. Well, they don't follow any of these three. It doesn't kick off an immediate quarantine, but it does move you over to this other box called what we call a yellow box. The best way that I can describe this yellow box is a holding tank. So the person with the stuffy nose and the fever now moves to this area, and we monitor things for 4 days. And we have to meet certain criteria for the person to come out of the holding tank. Well, one of the ways is if they have at least one major symptom, like the fever in my example, all their symptoms have to be gone within a day. If not, then we have to look at another strategy to come out of the holding tank. With minor symptoms, they have to all resolve within 48 hours, or you're still in the holding tank. By the end of the 4 days, really the way you get out of that, if you have not been able to have resolution of symptoms as it requires, you need a negative COVID test. So that is why very often in the process, when we find out that a student, one of your students, let's say, may be symptomatic, well, we ask pretty early on, can you please consider getting a COVID test? Because we know pretty early on, if we're past the 24 or 48 hours, if we reach the end of the 4 days and we haven't resolved according to the guidelines and we have no negative COVID tests, then we have to go back and quarantine the close contacts. That's where you have probably gotten a call or you know of folks where a student has been quarantined for 14 days, and then guess what happens? A day or two later, you get a notification the quarantine has been lifted. How that happens is this holding tank time expired. The 4 days ran out, and the student did get a test, but we don't have results. And maybe the day after the quarantine started, we get a negative COVID test and everyone can come back. So that's how this yellow box, that holding tank, that's how you see quarantines that lift early. It's because these elements have occurred, and even though we had to do a quarantine, we didn't have the test results. We get them, we can bring folks back. Sometimes we get to the end of a yellow box, the holding tank time period, and we quarantine students. And sometimes there is no COVID test happening with the particular person. And so that means everyone they have to just wait out the full length of the 14-day quarantine. So how do we navigate close contacts? How do we go about identifying people who are the close contacts of someone who is ill or COVID positive? Well, there's two big pieces. When? We can't contact trace since September, right? We have to have a time frame of when we are considering the contact to be potentially exposing someone to COVID. So the time period is critical. And where was this person? What relationship am I? If I'm 100 feet away, am I close contact? If I'm 2 feet away, kind of those two pieces come together. So the way it works is for the when part, we have to determine for the ill individual, what was the first day that they were having any symptom, even if it was a sore throat or a runny nose. And we have to back up the clock 48 hours. And that becomes our starting point for when we start to identify and we start our research, our contact tracing within those limits. Over here on the right side, you see some examples of the criteria that we have to consider in terms of the where. Walking by a person in the hallway for 10 seconds, you've walked by them and walk away, and that's the only contact you have within this contact tracing period, you're not considered a close contact. That was incidental contact. But we use these criteria points to determine. So for example, was someone in the classroom with the individual for 40 minutes or greater? And these time periods are cumulative. They are cumulative within the contact tracing time period. So let's just pretend it's 3 days that I potentially had exposure to someone. And let's just say each day I was in that room for 15 minutes. 15 plus 15 plus 15 is 45 minutes. I now exceed the 40 minutes and I would be quarantined. Let's say that instead I happened to be in the classroom each day, but I was in for 5 minutes each day. 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 15 minutes. Nope, that wouldn't set me up to be quarantined. We have contact tracing logs on the door of every one of our classrooms across the district, and we rely on these contact tracing logs to see who was in, who was out, how long they were there. As you can imagine, some of these contact tracing efforts, they don't just take 5 minutes when you're looking, especially if it's a significant amount of time. If someone's symptoms start on a Monday, it's easier to contact trace because the 2 days prior were weekends. But when that day hits on a Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, then there's more days to examine. Now, we don't, have you ever heard, well, let's just do that anyway. We'll just be safe. We'll do X, or we don't really have to, but let's just do it anyway, just to be safe. We don't say things like that when we're doing the contact tracing. In other words, we don't say, you know what, Becky was only in there for 15 minutes, but let's just quarantine her anyway. We stick with what the guidelines are. We don't want to do more than we should, and we don't want to do less than we should. We are trying to stick to the guidelines because scientists and physicians are the ones who created this, and I claim to be neither one of those folks. So we truly rely on the guidance that we have. Now, one more piece here, and then I would love to take any questions that you have. An interesting component that came out in October was this new dial. And you've seen this dial. I have my mouse going around it. And each county has a dial like this, and each county, they could all be on different portions of this dial. But this part in green is what I would say the least restrictive, because the data are the lowest. So the caution level, if you will, is at its lowest. And so in here we have less restrictions. As you move across the dial over here, this says stay at home. This would be a situation when the data are most impacted. We're seeing higher incident rates, we're seeing higher positivity rates, and so certainly things are much more restrictive. As we move through this dial, the rules by which we operate in what we do also are impacted. Here's an example. So for protect our neighbors, that's the least restrictive. If we have someone who's ill, they can return to school with one of two things: a negative COVID test or an alternate diagnosis from a doctor. So if I'm out ill, I can come back if I have a negative COVID test, or maybe a lab result showing I had strep throat. And the quarantined close contacts can come back when that person has that as well. Now keep in mind, anybody who has loss of taste or smell, COVID positive, or has come in contact with someone with COVID with a symptom, their full isolation period occurs and the full quarantine occurs for the close contacts. So we really don't have flexibility there. But for the other pieces, we have two choices of how to get back. This next one shows safer at home levels 1 and 2. Notice we're moving up the dial. We're becoming more restricted. And in fact, we've been at level 1, and today we've moved to level 2. So notice the difference, and I intentionally crossed it out. The expectations are tighter. To come out of a quarantine, you need a negative COVID test. No longer going to have a ticket to the show. You can't get in with the ticket of just an alternate diagnosis, if you will. Same with the quarantine. To come back to lift, negative COVID test of the ill individual. Same rules at the bottom about those automatic isolations and quarantines that are not going to be shorter in length. And now see what happens if we go to this piece of the dial. Notice this is now pointed at. This would be safer at home 3. We're not there yet. This would be the next level of restriction if it goes in that direction. Look what you need to come back now. A negative COVID test and the lab-based alternate diagnosis. The caution level has risen, so it is more difficult to come back, if you will. And this applies to the quarantine close contacts as well. And what's interesting about this, it's not a negative COVID test and a doctor's note that says Becky had an earache. It is a lab-based. Strep throat, that works very well. You can see positive for strep throat. But many things like a bad cold, or perhaps even a sinus infection, may not have a lab type of test that can be performed on that to say definitively you've had this. So what that means is if we do ever move to level 3, this means it will be more challenging, more difficult to return the ill person before their isolation and to return quarantine. There will be far less your quarantine was lifted early situations. Are there any questions for me?
Ms. Allen, we have had a few questions. People are questioning the concept of what is the point of the masks and 6 feet distancing procedures if people are going to be quarantined anyhow?
Well, let me back up. I'm going to go reverse in my slide here, and I'm going to go back to this particular slide. So there's different criteria here, and let's go down to this one. It says you have to quarantine if students were within 6 feet of the individual for 15 minutes or greater when both people are masked. Right away, you're getting a frame of reference about social distancing. So I'm within someone's 6-foot bubble, and I'm looking at the time, but notice this is saying I have my mask on. So if I'm 10 minutes near someone within the 6-foot bubble, and let's say that, let's go with 5 feet. The time difference that I can keep lower, if I were only around them for 6 minutes, I would not be in the quarantine group. Now, let's pretend I stood further away. I was 8 feet away from the person. We both had masks. Well, now I'm looking at this situation down here, and I know that I'm considering, do I move to this bottom one? I'm up here. Well, we're both masked, but now I've been farther away than the 6 feet. And so now that can be taken into account in terms of trying to really limit and really strictly identify the people who have to be quarantined. Notice down here, it's much more strict. If I was within 12 feet of someone, that's even like I'm further away, but I'm still in the target zone when I do not have a mask. So that's where the guidelines are showing what they put out, some flexibility around taking into account, did folks have masks? And was social distancing put into play? Now, I would also say this. We have had positive cases, and while we can never be 100,000% sure exactly what it transpired, we sure have a lot of puzzle pieces to make very educated guesses. And from what we are seeing, we are not seeing a tremendous amount of school-wide transmission in a classroom or from class to class. And so although having a mask or being socially distanced, someone may not escape, if you will, a quarantine according to these rules, we are confident that the social distancing and the mask wearing is helping in terms of reducing the transmission in our buildings. And so we don't want to lose sight of that as well.
Thank you. That was an excellent response. There was also a question regarding the number of minutes of contact. Some people thought it was 45 minutes of contact versus 40 minutes of contact in class.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and please know, the guidelines changed in October. So we did not have the guidelines were a little different, so you may have read that before, but you can see I took this as a snippet. And right now it's a 40-minute. There is another thing that I did not put in the slides called targeted contact tracing. And it was a little too complex to share during this time period. However, it is something that if strict seating charts are used, if masks are worn at all times, etc., we're in a certain level of the dial, that there may be greater opportunities if we can identify the ill individual and rest assured they were sitting in a particular location, that they were not, that they occupied their seating chart position, etc. Other people, we can start to expand a little bit our ability to exclude some folks who have been perhaps in the classroom. But again, there's a lot of parts. At an elementary school, for example, very tough because kids move around a bit. They're grouped up. Even though they're socially distanced, they're not always in the same seat. And so targeted contact tracing is tough. And as the level gets more restrictive on the dial, then targeted contact tracing, that option is not even allowed. But our principals are aware of it and know that where we can, if that's ever available, we will try if all the pieces align. But this in this pinkish box is the most current guidance that we have in determining. And again, it's important to note it's cumulative. So cumulative over this period of time. So 15 minutes on one day, great, I'm in good shape. Then I did 15 minutes the second day, still okay. But I went another 15 minutes and now I go beyond that limit. Other questions?
We also had a question that if someone tests negative for COVID and has an alternate diagnosis, such as the flu or bronchitis, can they return to school with a lingering cough if they are masked?
Let's go. So first of all, the only level, that's why I have backed my screen up. Can you still see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So what I want to show you here is that this has to be protect our neighbor, because remember in level 1 or 2 we no longer have an option to take the alternate diagnosis. But you said no, Becky, the negative PCR test. And so that's a negative COVID test. So what we do is we look over here, and if you look down in this green part, and I hope you can see it, I don't know if you can see my mouse anymore, or down here, can you see that part? The illness policies then would play. So we need to make sure that the symptoms have stayed resolved for 24 hours, and our internal policies that are in the handbook and all of that would apply. So whatever they say about a lingering cough or not a lingering cough, or medication free with no fever, etc., those pieces then come into play, and nurses at schools can help navigate that. Other questions?
We have another question. What will cause a school to switch to remote learning? Will it begin with only 2 weeks? And what will we need to change to return to in-person learning after the remote learning is declared?
Mr. Gregory, would you like to take that one, or would you like me to?
I can take the first part of it, and then you can take the question about what does it take to return from it's not really a school-wide quarantine, but a shift from the whole school being remote to coming back to in-person. So the first part of it is, and I'm glad the question was asked, because I think there's, because the media gets involved and there's a lot of communication around this, I think there's some misperception. When a school moves from a hybrid or in-person environment to 100% remote, it's not because every student in the school is quarantined or isolated, nor is it generally because, well, I don't think it's happened yet, but nor is it because the virus is spreading uncontrollably through the school population. Simply put, it's because enough staff members have been included in the quarantine and isolation components that there's not enough staff to sufficiently operate the school with kids in it. That's generally why, I may even say, Becky can correct me, but really the only reasons schools have moved from a hybrid or in-person environment to an online environment is because too many adults, or so many adults in the building, have been a part or are a part of the quarantine and isolations that we don't have enough teachers to be in classrooms. There's not enough substitutes to cover for the teachers, or there's not enough supervision to even run a school. That's the reason, or what determines whether a school can continue with hybrid or in-person learning and whether they have to go 100% remote. Does that sound pretty accurate, Becky?
Mr. Gregory, it does. I can think of one time that it was late on a Sunday. Mr. Gregory, I was calling you pretty late, almost at 10 o'clock at night, and we knew we had an issue at a school with someone who was positive, and it was a Sunday night. We simply did not have the capability to complete the contact tracing last night, so we closed school the next day to simply allow us to contact trace properly. That's about the only time I can think of that we did not transition to e-learning because we just simply did not have enough staff members.
And I guess another important part of that too is it's not the decision to, by the way, the decision is not singularly mine, nor is it Becky's, nor is it the principal's. It's generally, I'm at the end of that list. Generally it's, as Becky referred to as the huddles happen, discussion happens between the principal, the nurse, the COVID response member, HR, many times the health department or somebody from the health department, and they make a recommendation to me as to whether it should continue or remove or transition to remote. That's generally what the process is, but it is a decision that's made by several folks and based on several factors. I'm going to skip to the next part, Becky, and then you can continue. But as far as returning from a remote environment back to in-person, one, it's when the quarantines and isolations expire to the extent where there's enough staff then to return to the building, number one, and Becky can expand on that. And number two, she mentioned earlier the OCRT, or the cleaning/disinfecting team. Whenever the virus has apparently been in a building, or there's been significant quarantines or isolations, Becky calls out this cleaning team, and they go into the school or the facility, and as best they can tell where needs to be cleaned or disinfected, they'll get in there. Sometimes it's the entire facility. Sometimes it's just a portion of the facility. Sometimes it may be as small as one classroom. But the secondary part to that is we'd like to, before returning everybody to the building, or the classroom of students and teachers to their classroom, we'd like it to be cleaned and disinfected. So I'll stop there, and Becky, you can fill in the many blanks that I left.
No, you had no blanks. That was very well done, and that truly, because that is 99.9% of the time, why we would pivot to e-learning is lack of staff. We either have to let that run its course for the length of time, or as I talked about a little bit ago in this slide, you know, if all of a sudden it was lifted early, you know, that certainly could be a reason to return sooner. But typically, again, it's tied to a lack of staffing. Other questions?
Thank you for that response. There's been another question regarding that if we get to level 3, will the district be forced to move middle and high schools back to synchronous learning? In other words, can El Paso County force us to move in that direction?
That's a really good question, and it's one that I receive quite often. Let me start with this. If we being the county, is put on the on that dial that Becky had up there earlier, if we advance to the far right, the red category, any of those dials you see up there, if you look at where her mouse is now, that's the stay-at-home category or designation. In the state guidance, it basically says if we're put in a stay-at-home designation, then all learning would be in a remote environment. Outside of that, it is there's some suggestions, but there's no mandates. Any of those other levels, orange, yellow, blue, or green, it's really left up to the local school district to make the decision on how instruction is delivered and how learning will happen. So as Becky said, right now as of today, we're at the yellow, pointed straight up. The guidance says at that point it's, hybrid or in person or online. Any of those three are okay. Same thing with the orange, although the language from the state kind of suggests that maybe online would be best, but it doesn't take control. The only time that the county or the state would tell us, as far as I know, that we have to go completely remote is if we go to the red area, which is the stay at home, which if you remember, that's where we were. We went from 0 to 100 last spring when we went from everybody in school on Friday to the 13th to everybody online on Monday, March 16th. We went from normal operations to stay at home. Since then, they've put in these other categories in between that we can fluctuate between, which is good because it allows for some flexibility. But also understand you guys probably know we have, our community. We have 31 people attending this meeting. I imagine of the 31 of you, some of you think we should be in school more often in person. Some of you think we should be completely remote at this point. And some of you think that we should maintain the hybrid approach that's there now. And I say that because that's what's happening in our community right now. We have folks all over the board. There is no quote unquote right answer to this. I just met with students, my student advisory group this morning, and of course, I think the desire is for everybody to be back in school and for us to return to normal. The question is, when is the time appropriate for something like that? And that's where the what I'll call disagreement or misalignment happens. So that's, I see the comment there now about, at one point we were stay at home way back in the spring. And if you look at the data, the 14-day average per 100,000 was less than 50. We're now approaching 400. At that time, we were out of school. We're approaching 400 cases per 100,000 now, and we have kids in school. Sometimes it's hard to reconcile, right? Because this was all new for everybody, and we're learning as we go. But when I say we, I mean we, the school district, we, the health officials, we, the governor, the state of Colorado, the nation, everybody is learning as we go. So there's some things that just, it's hard to connect the dots and make any sense of from a logical perspective. Anything to add, Becky?
No, thank you.
We have
I've been following the questions, Diane. Are there other ones?
Yes, there are a few more. Number one, many people are asking that you can please share these slides with us so people can take a little bit of time and be able to see them better. They're very small. I'm sure for most of us, I can't read a lot of them.
I
think we could put Ann, Becky, if you can get those to Ann, we can put them in the minutes or even email them out. I think Becky's taken, most of this is available on the El Paso County or the state's Department of Health website with some comments she's added or some protocols she's added specific to District 20, but certainly they're public documents.
Absolutely, but if they could be emailed, that would be fantastic. Also, there was a question, is the number of positive cases absolutely a determining factor in closing a school? We do understand that it has to do with the number of faculty available, but is there kind of a guideline as to the number of positive cases that would absolutely close a school?
I believe, Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the county health department determines an outbreak, and I'll put that in quotes, an outbreak has happened, which has a definition of 2 or more unrelated cases within or 2 or more cases in a 14-day period outside of the same family, I believe it is. If an outbreak is determined, and that's the health department determines that, then I believe the school has to go remote for a period of time. And that would have to do with the number of positive cases. But outside of that, I'm not aware of. I think the discretion is mainly up to the school district. Becky, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, and right now they've kind of, in the beginning it was tighter, and now sometimes there's multiple sets of cases, multiple cohorts in a school that would have to be impacted. And whenever we get into an outbreak situation or what we call a suspected outbreak, we work directly with El Paso County Public Health, and they decide, is this classified as an outbreak or not? And you can have an outbreak at a school, but the circumstances are such that it does not require to be shut down. So they really are unique cases on those, and they are ones that El Paso County gathers all of the information from us and they render a decision.
Thank you. There are a few more questions about whether you've seen any negative impacts on students regarding the quarantines. A lot of students seem to be getting frustrated with so many quarantines and are maybe uninterested in going to school at this point in time just because, we're quarantined one day, then it's lifted and different things like that. Have you seen any impact of that on the students?
That's a great question. I think the answer, generally speaking, is absolutely. There's frustration on the part of students. There's frustration on the part of parents, and teachers are very frustrated. It's very difficult and challenging to, create continuity in planning your lessons, and with instruction. All elements of teaching and learning essentially become very challenging in an environment where you're, 1 week you can go to class, the next couple of weeks you can't go to class in person. Everything shifts from online to not online. Sometimes there are sibling complications with that at different grade levels. Many times, or I shouldn't say many times, sometimes there are issues with the number of computers or availability of household space in the situations where there's multiple children and they all have to be home at the same time. All of this elevates everybody's frustration level. Again, we have 26,000 students. I meet with a small fraction of those every month. Between 10 and 20 juniors and seniors I meet with on my advisory group. We've met a few times this year, and the feedback obviously from them is they would love to be back in school, at least on a more regular basis. And some of them even said, if it's because of the quarantines and schools moving or cohorts moving to online, it would almost be better in some cases to just move completely remotely. But then there's, how does that impact all the activities that students participate in? And I think that's the biggest loss is the relationship. We're social creatures, and when we don't get to interact, in person, whether it's with teachers, whether it's with classmates, whether it's with before or after school activities, I think that creates the larger element of frustration and anxiety. But I was hoping that, then on top of that, you add social unrest. We've witnessed over the last 6 months or so. And then on top of that, a very contentious election season. Just feels, and maybe I'm included in this, but we're all wound up pretty tight. And I have no good answers. That's the worst news. I don't know, what solutions are out there other than vaccines or the virus getting to the point where we can return more normally to our regular lifetime activities.
These certainly are uncertain and stressful times, no questioning that. There is one more question about a possible exclusion from the quarantine. So for instance, is a parent able to ask for their child to be excluded from a quarantine?
I'm not sure how that would look in terms of if they meet the criteria that we discussed. We wouldn't have the opportunity to do that because we just really have to stay true to the guidelines.
Yeah, I don't think there's an option to excluded from a quarantine, and it's not just for example, my own child may say, but Dad, I feel fine. There's no reason for me to be quarantined. If we were to allow that to happen, it's not just that student or my student, it's the potential exposure to others, because especially with the age group we're talking about in under 18, so many times there are no symptoms, but somebody is walking around or in class or in school in a potentially, and again, I'm not a medical expert, but my understanding is potentially infecting or affecting others. So I'm not aware of any exceptions to or opt-outs for a quarantine.
Are there any additional questions? I'm kind of leaving the Wednesday classroom time until we get to Tom's question and answer session. I cannot thank you enough. That was an absolutely amazing presentation from both of you. This is such a complicated issue that, especially also being married to a physician who's coping with most of this every day, you have such a deep understanding of the symptoms of everything that's going on and how to implement it in our schools that I am constantly amazed at how well District 20 is doing. Not that I don't expect that from you, because you guys always perform at such an amazing level, but this is just truly phenomenal how you are handling this situation within our school district. So I want to thank you deeply regarding how this is working and all the efforts that are being put forth by the staff, by the administration, and the teachers to handle this so well. I think, unless there are any other questions, if anyone needs to raise a hand and ask an additional question, we can probably go ahead and move on to Tom Gregory's question and answer session. Oh,
there is one question that we probably need to address, and it's about, I don't know, I have an understanding, but I don't know if it's the definite answer. How often is the district's dashboard updated? Do you know that?
Well, we collect the data and we put it in a separate chart every day. Anne, do you know, is it, I think it's daily, but Anne, do you have a sense of when it's picked up from the chart you do?
It's daily.
Yeah.
Even on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's our data. That's not data received from the county or somewhere else. That's the data we collect based on the COVID response team work. So there's a hand up. Anne.
Hi there. Yes, I was the one who asked the dashboard question, and I do know that it states that it's updated every 24 hours. However, it was not last week. And my question simply is, I mean, I understand there's a lot going on, so it may not be updated every day, which is fine. However, we had 2 quarantines lifted at our elementary school on a Sunday, and it was Thursday morning when it was finally updated. And the only reason I asked the question is, as I'm watching all of our phases change on that dial, it seems that we would want to make sure that that is very accurate, because I'm assuming the county, the governor, all of the powers that be are utilizing these tools to help make decisions moving forward. So I guess my question would be, if we see an inaccuracy on that, is there a person we should call or question?
I think I would suggest if you have a question or you think someone is inaccurate, send an email to Anne Krachevik, and if she doesn't know the answer, she can get it to the right person, or if there's something that's wrong, we can get it corrected. But it's such a new and different component for us to have. It's kind of there's multiple people's hands in the pot, I guess we'd say. So if your contact was Anne Krachevik, that would probably be the best place to start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Becky, I see some questions. I don't know if you can see them, but about the school lunch. And if you can't see them, I can read them to you, but could you address those?
Okay. Complained about school lunch, the choices, lemons as the fruit. Okay, that would be problematic. We were told our child needs to order 2 lunches. What I will do, Ms. Caudell.
It seems like it's both quality and quantity.
Yes.
Next couple questions, both, and less processed food. Is it a possibility for less processed and more fresh types of food?
So, and I'm guessing that you're referring to the meals served during the day, not the remote meals that are served from 4 to 5. I know that some of the meals, as you know, through the school lunch program, through the USDA, we have free meals right now. And so there are some restrictions on what's considered a reimbursable meal. But what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, the 3 parents that put these questions in here, we will go ahead and someone will be contacting you from Sodexo to go ahead and listen to your concerns, and I will be setting that up after our meeting today. So I really appreciate the feedback.
We also have another question about Wednesdays and when they might revert to a standard school hours with no delayed start.
I'm guessing this refers mostly at the elementary school level, because the middle schools and high schools are kind of in an asynchronous environment on Wednesdays. The Wednesday mornings for the elementary level, frankly, part of it's to create some level of similarity between the elementary and the middle schools and high schools. The part of the reason going forward for the 2-hour delays at the elementary schools, and not that this is your concern too much, but our elementary teachers are required this year to take 45 hours of additional training in teaching literacy or literacy training. So part of that time on those 2-hour late starts is to make sure that they can meet the 45-hour requirement. The other part is to be able to discuss, as sometimes it's grade level teams, sometimes it may be more subject matter teams, and what's happening in this environment, what things have been working for teachers, what things have been frustrating for teachers. So it's a way of teaming to try to improve. The short answer to the question of is it going to end or when it will get back to kind of a full day, I don't have a clear answer on that. Certainly, we're going to try to limp through as best we can until the winter break for now, and then reevaluate the health data and everything else at that time.
I'm not seeing any additional questions at this moment. Would anyone like to unmute and ask an additional question?
While we're doing that, Diane, I have we have two announcements that we need to make that I would like to be made to this group. I don't know if Tacey's still on. Tacey, are you still here?
I am.
Why don't you go ahead and let everybody know about our graduation guideline delay?
Absolutely. Good afternoon again. I just wanted to give you an update. As many of you know, that new graduation guidelines were supposed to be in effect, full implementation this year, the 2021 school year. That meaning students would have to meet not just the 50 credit hour requirement that is been normal in District 20, if you will, but then also having to demonstrate proficiency in English language arts and math on one of a number of menu options that CDE has laid out for us. So like SAT, ASVAB, AP, IB courses, things like that. And these new guidelines were supposed to be in effect this year. However, because of the shift to remote learning last spring and the impact it had on students not being able to take SAT and lots of just factors that have been impacting us during this pandemic and COVID, the State Board of Education voted unanimously to allow districts to have flexibility and not require full implementation of these new guidelines until next school year. So students graduating in 2022, our current junior class. So at the district, we're still tracking all students and we'll still report for the many students who have already met those graduation requirements, but we're just delaying full implementation till next year.
Thank you, Tacey. And Dr. Smith has a quick announcement also.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, just super quick, just a reminder that the Character and Climate Survey, which is something we give every year, gives us a sense of how students, staff, and parents feel about schools and how we're doing there in terms of culture and climate, as well as our character ed program. So that survey window is open until the 20th of November. So please, if you haven't already done it, take the survey, encourage your students to take a survey, and I look forward to sharing those results with you in the spring.
Okay, thanks, Tacey, and thanks, Jim. And thank you, Diane, for letting us announce those two important topics.
Oh.
I'd be happy to continue with questions if we have any.
I'm not seeing any on the chat. Does anyone have any additional questions at this time? All right, well, thank you so much for attending our November meeting. Once again, we will not be meeting in December. Our next meeting will be January 6th. So we look forward to seeing you at that time. We hope you have a lovely holiday season and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Thanks, Diane.
Absolutely. You guys are amazing, Tom. I cannot get over how much you are accomplishing with everything with COVID. This is truly phenomenal.
It's just a lot going on.
There is a lot going on.